30th to order. Would you call the roll? Judy,
Yes.
thanks.
Counselor Kaiser?
Present.
Counselor Anderson?
Likewise.
Counselor Nanki?
Here.
Counselor Liang?
Here.
Counselor Osick?
Here.
Counselor Hoy?
Here.
Counselor Cook?
Here.
Counselor Lewis?
Here.
Mayor Bennett?
Here, will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Counselor Hoy, motion.
I move additions and revisions to the agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. So as you'll recall, this is a work session devoted exclusively to the Salem River crossing. There will be no public comment in this, but you all will have hopefully ample opportunity to ask questions of a panel to be introduced, but folks who are highly specialized in the areas and have been working on this for some time. But I'm going to turn it over to Robert Chandler. He's going to kind of set the stage. You'll be able to ask him some question. He will also introduce our panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Councilors. It is my pleasure to be here tonight to talk to you about the Salem River Crossing Project. I am Robert Chandler. I am the Assistant Director of Public Works. With us this evening are individuals representing Federal Highway Administration, Oregon Department of Transportation, the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Government, and also our own Transportation Planning Manager from Public Works. You see on the screen there, and their name tags. We're particularly appreciative of Director Garrett and Division Administrator Ditzler joining us tonight from Federal Highway and from Oregon Department of Transportation.
Yeah, welcome. We're really pleased you're here. Thank you very much.
This work session is here as a result of this motion from November of last year. In preparation for the work session, City Councilors received about 12 days ago a staff report that contained answers to over 130 questions. At your desk tonight is another 11 questions that were asked after that first staff report was published. In my presentation tonight, I will occasionally provide a cross-reference to that staff report so you can see the questions that relate to it. For example, the City Council motion is from question 4-A. I have a very short presentation that summarizes where we have been, how we got to where we are now, and the choices ahead for City Council. If at all possible, I would appreciate it if I could proceed without interruption. That allows me to get through the presentation. It's a short presentation and gives us the opportunity to get into questions and answers quite quickly after that. At issue tonight is an incomplete federal final environmental impact statement. Until that is completed or steps are taken, there is no record of decision issued. And so I thought we would start by asking the question, what is a record of decision? It is the final step of the environmental impact statement process. It is essentially, it memorializes the discussion, the selection of alternatives, why some alternatives were accepted, why they're analyzed, and in the end, what was selected amongst all the various alternatives as the preferred alternative. When it goes into the record of decision, it becomes a selected alternative. Once issued, a record of decision requires commencement of initial right-of-way acquisition or construction. For the City of Salem and the Salem River Crossing Project, there's funds set aside by council waiting for council action that involves the acquisition of property along the alignment of Marine Drive. Sorry. I pushed the wrong button. It's called PowerPoint harassment. Hang a second.
No.
We'll get there.
Yeah. You can hit the start button or something.
You know, I could have. I was kind of on my path already. Here we are.
You got IT people.
Got it. As I was saying, once issued, a record of decision does not expire. In your packet, in your information, we talked about one record of decision that's now in its third decade. And that is a record decision involving Kubler, Cordon Road, I-5 interchange. That's a project that's been phased over time as priorities and funding is available. So there is no expiration date, although depending on the time the record of decision was issued and the project commences or the phase of the project commences, there may be a requirement to reevaluate to make sure nothing has changed, that the environmental impacts that have been evaluated, to see how they've changed and take actions accordingly. Page down. There we are. The environmental impact statement process begins with a notice of intent. Ours is published in the Federal Register in November of 2006. It requires you to develop alternatives that will be evaluated in the draft environmental impact statement. I'll talk about that development in a moment. That allows you to start and commence the draft environmental impact statement. Ours came out, our DEIS, Draft Environmental Impact Statement, was published in April of 2012. From that, Alternative 4D was selected as the preliminary preferred alternative. That was selected and sent out to the jurisdictions for our comments. In short, Salem did not like it and came back with a Salem alternative. And I'll talk about the relationship between Alternative 4D, the Salem alternative, and what became the preferred alternative. But now that a preferred alternative has been selected, that allows start to begin on the final environmental impact statement. Whereas a draft EIS looked at all 8 alternatives plus the no build, the final environmental impact statement is looking at the preferred alternative and the no build. That's where we are now. That work began soon after February of 2014. Among the actions required for the environmental impact statement to be published are land use actions. There was a joint public hearing in October of 2016. It was joint. It was City of Salem, City of Kaiser, Marion County, and Polk County. Salem passed its ordinances in December 2016, land use ordinances and actions. That decision was appealed. Land Use Board of Appeals remanded that decision in April 2017. In the interim, waiting for further action, council formed a council task force on congestion. That report was issued in October 2018. The tasking for the congestion relief task force was to look at options for dealing with congestion in the study area, mostly downtown, across the bridges, and along West Salem, independent of whether a decision is made to build a bridge. And that was a report that came out in October 2018. And we're here. So at this point, as you saw in the staff report, Federal Highway Administration has stated that they require an indication, a commitment from Salem Council on where we want to go next. You have 2 choices. One is to decide to proceed on the land use actions involved in the remand. There's also land use action required on the impacts of the preferred alternative to Wallace Marine Park. We proceed toward that. That allows publication of the final environmental impact statement. When that is published by Oregon Department of Transportation, we expect Federal Highway will issue a record of decision for the preferred alternative. That's TAC 1. Alternatively, Salem Council can make a decision not to proceed with the land use actions. In that case, Federal Highway will issue a record of decision for the no-build alternative. And that's where we are. The 2019 deadline for the record of decision is a deadline established by Federal Highway. Again, that marks the end of the EIS process, and it has to be completed. If there is no record of decision issued closing the EIS process, the process will be considered incomplete, and Federal Highway has the authority to get repayment of all the federal funds that have been invested in the project to date. So how do we get the preferred alternative? First, a quick refresher of the, I always call this the CAST. Key terms in here, SCAT, Salem Kaiser Area Transportation Study. That is the municipal planning organization for transportation in our region. The Salem River Crossing Project Task Force is a broad set of stakeholders who provide advice to the oversight team. The oversight team is elected or appointed officials charged with making recommendations to local governments, SCATs, Oregon Department of Transportation, and Federal Highway Administration. Those are the key players in what I'm about ready to show you. So to do this, I had to extend the timeline from what had been 2006 to 2002, and I have to cheat. In 1997, a little over 20 years ago, SCATS commissioned a study to look at different alternatives for crossing the Willamette River. Known as the General Corridor Evaluation, that looked at 13 different alternatives for crossing the river, as well as looking at the no build. There's a notice of intent for reference. And this, which is figure 17 in your report, this came out of that study. And you'll see that this study looked at potential river crossings as far north as Lock Haven and Kaiser, and as far south as Kubla Road. Using this information and more, the Salem River Crossing Task Force and Oversight Team developed and worked on another set of alternatives. This, and actually the previous slide, were all briefed to the City Council about 11 years ago on potential bridge corridors. Based on this and more discussions and a public process, what resulted was a set of 8 alternatives to be evaluated in the draft environmental impact statement. These span the 3 different crossing locations, as you see there, and those 8, along with the no build, form the basis for the research done in the draft environmental impact statement. The draft environmental impact statement, again, was developed over a period of time. In August 2012, it came out and compared and contrasted those 8 alternatives along with a no build. From that, and again, following a very public process, the oversight team recommended alternative 4D as a preliminary preferred alternative and sent it out for consideration. Salem City Council said no. It rejected alternative 4D and approved what became known as a Salem alternative. When the Salem alternative came back to the oversight team, there was an adjustment on the scope. I'll talk about that in a moment, and that became the preferred alternative. So let me step you through that process. So to go from alternative 4D to the Salem alternative, Salem City Council said there are 2 problems with alternative 4D, only 2. One is too expensive, and 2, it has too many impacts. The impacts are too great. So make the shift from alternative 4D to the Salem alternative. For one thing, the alternative 4D had 6 lanes. Salem alternative has 4. 4D, elevated bridge approaches on the east side approaching the east bridgehead. That was removed. Marine Drive, you see kind of up at the center line and to the left, Marine Drive is extended from River Bend Road, curving around to join Wallace Road. That was removed. Orchard Heights was going to be realigned. That's that, I call it the Nike swish in the middle of your screen there. A lot of impacts with that. That was removed. Glen Creek was going to be widened. That was removed. Too expensive, too impactful. The elevated bridge approaches on the West Salem side of the bridge. That was removed. The elevated roadway running adjacent to Wallace Marine Park, a viaduct, that was removed with the Salem alternative. And lastly, this braided ramp, very expensive but also highly impactful to the areas of Edgewater, that was removed. By removing that braided ramp, so I got to talk with my hands now for a moment. So a braided ramp, what it did is it took traffic coming off of Marion Street Bridge westbound and traffic coming on from Marine Drive, and they crossed over there on Highway 22. And the reason for that braided ramp is you've got some traffic coming on that wants to continue west. At the same time, you've got some traffic going west that wants to exit at Rosemont. By removing that braided ramp, we ended up with a problem. In the vicinity of Yola Drive, Rosemont, and Highway 22, you've got traffic coming on from the new Marine Drive. At the same time, you've got traffic trying to go off there at Rosemont. So for the Salem alternative to work, you have to do something with that intersection. That was presented to the oversight team, and that's the difference between the Salem alternative and the preferred alternative. This work, the future planning study for how to reconfigure that access, and the cost involved with however that reconfiguration has worked, was determined to be outside the scope of the Salem River Crossing project, both scope for research and scope for budget. But it is still very true, it has to be addressed. And in the Salem Transportation System Plan, the draft that you all approved now under remand, there's a very clear statement that says the city of Salem will not allow this to be closed, the exit at Rosemont to be closed, until there's a plan for what to do about it. So that's how we went from alternative 4D to the Salem alternative, and this is now what is the preferred alternative. 2 lanes, either a single 4-lane bridge or a two side-by-side 2-lane bridges. Did I say that right? And bridge approaches Marine Drive at grade until right around Glen Creek, and then it begins to elevate, crosses over the Union Street walking bridge, and curves over and joins Oregon Highway 22, and other changes as you see there. Oh, I mentioned that one of the things that Salem Council was concerned about is the cost. The initial estimated cost for alternative 4D was $687 million. The current estimate for the preferred alternative, which does not include construction work that might need to be done at Rosemont, Edgewater, at Rosemont, Eola Drive, and Highway 22, is about $425 or $430 million. The cost savings between what became the preferred alternative and what started as alternative 4D is about $250 million, about $250 million. So, this is where we are. The final environmental impact statement is here, and council action. So by my count, over the past 20 years, over very nearly 18 different crossings have been evaluated, and no fewer than 20 different combinations of ways to cross have been evaluated, compared, and at this point, we are down to 2 choices, either preferred alternative or the no build. And there's deadline. So there's been a lot of interest in how we might fund this project. 2 points, and I'll talk about those. First point is that the project can be phased. Second is that no decision has yet been made on how it can be funded. First, on phasing. This was presented to City Council, I'm sorry, the oversight team, and is in your report on possible phasing of the project in 4 different phases. One phase could be constructing the bridge and the landings, basically connecting Pine and Hickory over to Hope Avenue and Wallace Road. That is estimated to be about $300 million, and that estimate is based on 4 lanes, or 2 2-lane bridges. It would be something less than $300 million if the first phase of this phase is a single bridge of 2 lanes. Marine Drive North to River Bend is estimated at about $10 million. Marine Drive South to where Glen Creek is before that elevation starts is about $20 million. And the cost estimate for the elevated ramps is about $100 million, and that does not include the work at Eola Drive, Highway 22, Eola, and Rosemont. This is in your report. It also is a product of the oversight team. This was developed in large measure from a workshop held the week before this December meeting in 2014. So this workshop, I'm going to add to it. The purpose of the workshop was to step through various funding options, talk about phasing the project, and really understand the trade-offs. One goes up, one goes down. What are the options? And to some degree, is it feasible to even afford this given these various ranges? The conclusion is that it's feasible if some of these things come together, a conclusion that would not have been made necessarily had the preferred option, and I'm not making this up, been the tunnel. One of the options evaluated was a tunnel that weighed in at $3 billion. So this shows that indeed there are ways to fund it and is an interactive funding tool. What came from the oversight team that has this table in its meeting summary that under the title Recommended Funding Strategy. And if you look in the meeting summary, you'll find that this is not the recommended strategy. This is, as you see here, it's conceptual, it's a guiding framework, iterative process. The decision has not yet been made. And part of the reason the decision has not been made is that people involved with this thing were not the ones who would make that decision. Again, from the looking at looking at some of the ideas for local and regional funding options. This is not the grants from the state or the federal government. These are the funding options. Voter approval is required for a gas tax, a vehicle registration surcharge, or property tax levy. Tolling requires approval by the Oregon Transportation Commission, as well as Federal Highway Administration. And vehicle registration can be levied by counties, not by cities, and you see there. So should council choose to pursue a course of action that would lead to a preferred alternative build record of decision, this type of discussion and various funding options would need to be discussed at some point. So, in summary, this is where we are. And again, repeating from what is in the staff report, Federal Highway Administration has advised Oregon Department of Transportation and the city that a definitive statement from council indicating whether or not it intends to proceed toward completing the final environmental impact statement must be received by Federal Highway Administration by mid-February 2019. And again, the reason for that is it takes time to put out the record of decision, either no build or for us to complete the process for the land use actions to get the preferred alternative as a record of decision. So council's choices, we either proceed toward completing land use actions or not. And there's deadline. So that concludes my presentation, and subject to your questions, I'm finished.
Were we going to have, give Mr. Disler as well as the director
Yes, I would.
a chance to comment for just a moment?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay.
Gentlemen.
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts. Certainly have Mr. Cole and Mr. Chickering here to inform the conversation as we move forward. I truly appreciate Mr. Chandler's very thorough and comprehensive review because he has set the stage. He has laid the foundation. We are at a hinge moment. There's no question about that. And I think tonight's conversation offers the opportunity to make sure there's a clear understanding of the facts, where this project stands, and ensuring that we ask and answer the questions through the various lenses of the technical, the operational, the financial implications, the legal implications, as well as the political realities. I believe this will inform the discussion and hopefully the deliberations and decision that will truly articulate the course of action that this council needs to take. And as articulated by Mr. Chandler, that is either to take actions which advance a build alternative or advance a no-build alternative. I think the direction and the intent of the Federal Highway Administration has been made clear by Mr. Ditzler, and I'll allow him to say that, but there is a clock that is ticking in terms of moving forward. And if we choose not to, we have a choice in that preferred alternative of the no build. I think the last thing we want to do is have to pay back roughly $8 million or so that have been expended to date because we don't meet timelines that have been shared with us by our federal partners here. So with that, we stand ready to inform the conversation from the ODOT perspective, working with our partners at the federal level as well. And I'd be remiss to say that we have partners with the city of Salem and our MPO, the SCATS folks. And this is a long process. I think we're 13 years into it. But again, we're at an inflection point, a hinge moment, and I hope tonight informs the discussion and eventually the actions of this council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Director Garrett. And Mr. Ditzler.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor, councilors. Director Garrett, thank you very much. I would say, just as Director Garrett ended that, this has been a partnership for the past 13-plus years, I'll say, in moving a project forward. The reason we're here tonight, I'm here with Mike Morrow from FHWA and Emily Klein. You know, we're here to help the council, in your own mind, answer questions that you have that will help you move this forward. And so that's purely the reason we're here. Now, this project was started out of a desire to move a project forward. And again, that was 13 years ago. And so now it's time, from the federal perspective, to make that decision on whether it goes forward or not. So again, we're here to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Chandler, did you want to?
Now, questions now.
Okay, all right. Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, not sure how to. My questions pertain to things that I've read from the public in the last 24 hours. And I believe they're covered in the report, but the comments on the social media are saying a different story, so I just want to make sure I clarify a couple of points. First of all, I want to make sure from the City of Salem and the Oregon Department of Transportation that there is no intention of closing Rosemont, not until after a study has been started or completed, but Rosemont will not close until an alternative exit entrance in the general facility would be opened. Simple question, I need a simple answer.
You are correct. It will not be closed. And council has some control over that because the process to make the changes at Eola Drive, Rosemont, rest with the Regional Transportation System Plan. The Regional Transportation System Plan require changes to make that happen. The city sits on the group that makes those decisions for the Regional Transportation System Plan, and any changes have to be unanimous. I get that right, Julie? Okay.
And that is a commitment that we've made.
Okay,
Yes.
so hopefully that's clear. No closing of Rosemont until the other exit entrance is opened.
That is correct.
Second thing, and this is regarding, and I know this is not really the issue we're talking about, but funding of the project. On page 38, it shows the results of basically what was accepted from the workshop that was done in December of 2014, 15. And it basically, if you read this, just read it, it shows that these phases, or the total amount, will be paid primarily by funding sources locally. And I recognize, because I was in this workshop, I went through it, but I want to make sure, I've heard it already, I've read it already, but I want to make sure this is not a funding plan. This is something that was done as part of the process, and the true funding plan for this project would not happen until after the record of decision is issued.
You're correct. A funding plan is required prior to receipt of federal funds for construction. A financial plan is not required for a record of decision.
And sorry, again, these were brought up just today. Last question at this particular point. The goal for the Salem River crossing. I've gone through this. I've been around for the last 14 years. I don't recall a goal statement for the Salem River crossing. But I do see and have heard numerous times about a purpose statement. So have I missed the goal statement? Or is it true that the goal statement and the purpose statement are really the same thing?
ODOT, you want to answer that?
Yes, the purpose and need statement is essentially the goal for the project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to be sure all of you know that you can at any point, if you hear something you'd like to answer, you're more than welcome to jump in as part of the panel to make sure we get as complete an answer as possible. So please feel very comfortable to just speak up. Okay, Counselor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chandler, I think I heard you say that the Rosemont exit, the Rosemont area exit was removed from the project, at least in part because of cost. What would the cost be if we were to rearrange it, close it, open a new one? How much would that cost in addition to whatever the bridge might cost?
I don't know if there's been an estimate of that cost. To my knowledge, it's not been evaluated. Okay, I'm getting the shake of the head. The reason it was removed from the Salem River Crossing project is because the actual effort to do that cost estimating, the preliminary engineering and all that was considered to be outside of the scope of the project, and the money to do that preliminary engineering and cost estimating was not part of the project. That's why it was taken out.
Thank you. And where would the money for any eventual project for that piece come from?
Okay.
I don't know. Go ahead. So,
Money for a project at this point could come from any of the same sources that you saw in the table for the conceptual funding strategy for the river crossing. Hard to predict what that would be. It could be state legislative action. It could be federal action. It could be local action. And until we even had a concept, much less a cost, it'd be really difficult to predict how that might come about.
Thank you.
Counselor Cook.
Thank you. This question pertains to the funding as well. We've talked about the funding for the initial process, but it's my understanding, since this is within the city of Salem, who would maintain ownership of this facility once it was built, and where would the cost come for maintenance for the bridge and improvements? Would this be part of the state transportation system and fall under ODOT? How would that work?
so I'm looking over at ODOT.
I always look to ODOT, so.
Boot the director, that's never good.
Yeah, but you're retired.
Switch your name card before we pick up.
All right, I'll switch my name card.
I was supposed to remind Matt to take his card.
We had agreed to tag me in at some point. My name is Sonny Chickering. I'm the ODOT Region 2 manager. I was also a member of the oversight team for the project. And my staff, who many of which are here tonight, are the ones who primarily been working with the consultants and your planner and those from SCATS and the other jurisdictions to put together all of these documents. The question about jurisdiction was never resolved by the oversight team. I think that it's apparent that some of these are already state highway system, some of them are already local system, but I think that at some point, we would need to enter into an intergovernmental agreement that's specified and that each entity would sign, that at the conclusion of the project, after construction, certain segments of the project would be allocated to either remain under the jurisdiction where they are today, or new segments would be specified to be allocated to one entity or another. But we've not made those commitments yet.
Thank you. Just an additional question. So as we've seen with some of our current bond measures that have passed, costs can sometimes escalate for various reasons, or costs can change. So some of my thoughts are, what are the additional cost measures? I can see in the chart we've got things like the gas and vehicle taxings depending on different jurisdictions and what jurisdictions intend to do. It would seem that they're independent in whether or not they choose to raise a vehicle tax fee or whether or not they choose for tolling. I see that in Portland, the permission was given to toll some of the highways up there as well, but that was given to a specific jurisdiction in the highway. And I'm sorry, it's not my technical field, so I'm using my terminology there. My concern is if this moves forward, and from what I'm hearing from the presentation is, we move forward with this and then we'll figure out the funding and cement it down and decide who's paying for what. And then it sounds like, because nobody really, we're one step at a time. Once that gets done, then we'll figure out who's going to actually own it and who will have those costs there. What do we do as costs escalate? And then if costs decrease, where does that money go? Because I know as far as infrastructure goes, within the city, we have a tremendous need for sidewalks, for crossings that it seemed like a drop in the bucket compared to these funds. So part of me is thinking, since this is already in our vicinity, can we just use the rest for sidewalks? You know, what are we thinking there? Is that not possible? Explain to me how that would work.
Okay. As far as, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
All right, I'll take
I
a
want to know
swing
what
at
you're
it.
going to do about our sidewalks, Sonny.
Yeah. The department is very supportive of active transportation in all forms, and we encourage you
Sorry,
to.
did I hear that right? You'll be funding our sidewalks
No,
for the duration of the project? Thank you.
As far as who's going to raise the funds, again, it's not been determined as was discussed, and each entity would have to take their own independent action to do so. And so funding arrangements for large projects like this can be done in a couple of different ways. One, you can assign specific portions of the project to be funded by a particular entity. If, for example, there was an improvement to Wallace Road, that could be assigned to the city of Salem. If there was an improvement to a portion of Highway 22, that could be assigned.
Who would be doing this assigning?
It would be an agreement. Assignment is the.
It would be
not-
self-assigned.
Correct.
We would
All the
choose to fund
entities
it.
who are participating in the funding would agree on this package. So you could do it by either assigning portions of the work, or you can just assign a lump sum of funds that will be provided by each entity, and then each entity would be responsible for determining how they would raise their portion of those
Sonny, if I
funds.
may interrupt just for a moment, and for the city, how that would work is intergovernmental agreements do come to council, so that would be a council policy decision.
And what if we move forward and like several, well, not several, I'm just thinking specifically of the sobering center, how we've moved forward with this idea and we're still coming up short on finances, specifically with partners.
This is not like the sobering, this is a different
This is
concept, but I
different.
hear what you're saying.
I mean, what do we do if we agree to this project and then we're left?
Just a thought, but that kind of hypothetical, I think, has a mechanism for resolution with your vote at a later date through an intergovernmental agreement that would come to us. So that's the kind of thing, we would have public votes. There's a whole batch of ways these kinds of funding issues would be resolved. The problem is, what are we funding at this point? So I hear your concern, Counselor. I'm just not sure that posing hypotheticals will resolve the issue. I think there are priorities, and each of us have them, and we'll kind of work from there, okay? Okay. Counselor Kaiser?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to start back a bit in history. Could you please bring up the timeline? I think it was like the first one you had, perhaps. Because I had just questions about the process from the, specifically in 2008. So my question is the alternatives that were studied were decided on in 2008. Am I correct?
How's that?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So the way I'm reading that is the alternatives that were studied in the draft EIS were decided on in February of 2008. Is that correct?
That was the 8 alternatives that became part of the draft environmental impact statement. That decision was made following a public process in 2008.
2008.
That is correct.
So all of the alternatives that were studied were really decided on 11 years ago.
Thereabouts.
Okay. And after that decision was made, no other alternatives could be studied for this EIS. Is that you couldn't add in others later? It was just
Well,
those 8.
Well, in fact, one was that what became the Salem alternative that then produced the preferred alternative.
Okay.
And I think the issue, though, is those 8 really set what was preferred on the different crossing corridors.
Right.
And there were corridors, places to span the Willamette River, some that went further north than Kaiser and south of Salem, various different alternatives that for a variety of reasons were eliminated from consideration. So it really set, where are those corridors that make the most sense with the least impacts for crossing.
So because that Salem alternative was still within that corridor, it was allowed to be studied or selected.
That's correct. It had the same alignment as alternative 4D as far as crossing the Willamette River at Pine and Hickory.
Okay. And then a couple more questions related to that. So the alternatives, they were developed, they were studied, and then it took about 4 years to draft the EIS, it seems.
Those
So
are the dates
it's
I've
like
got. I'm not sure when it actually
April
started, that they were
2012.
developed and fit. I'm sorry.
Right. It was worked on
Yeah.
for about 4 years.
Is that about right?
Okay.
4 years?
And then my other question is, what was going on between February of 2014 and October 2016? Because February 14th, there was a preferred alternative was selected. And then the last kind of action that was taken was the city council, Salem City Council, the joint public hearing, October of 2016. So what happened in that 2.5-year period?
So that was the action that I selected for this graphic. There were a lot of things happening because once the preferred alternative had been selected, that starts the ability for ODOT and the consultant team to begin doing the analysis that came up with all those different technical addendums on traffic and transportation and air pollution and emissions and social justice and all those other studies. That was commenced soon after the preferred alternative was selected.
Okay, and then my final one for just this is, and then the land use actions came before City Council, Salem City Council in December 2016. And my question is, why didn't they come earlier than that? Because was it because it was taking 2.5 years to develop to that point where you could take those land use, or is it something
Well, the
else?
city
I'm
attorney.
just wondering why
Yeah.
then and not earlier.
The studies that Robert Chandler referred to were the backbone of the decision. It constituted the findings. So the decision in the hearing in October, along with the ordinance, relied on the findings from the EIS in large part.
So were the findings not developed until October of 2016 then? Is that my understanding?
Correct.
Okay. So it took 2.5 years to do all of that work. Okay.
Roughly, and there was a lot of work. As you recall, you might recall that the findings report that came to council in preparation for this ran, I think, 800 pages. So there was an awful lot of work that went into laying the groundwork for the public hearing.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Councilor Anderson.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the recommended funding. I'm looking specifically at page 38 of your staff report that was given to us. I guess my question is, you indicate that it's far from a settled matter. That was in your written report, and you also indicated that tonight. So I'm kind of curious, what other funding options are there? I mean, there was a workshop. The workshop came up with these funding options. So let's assume we don't want to do these funding options. What other funding options are available? Sounds like none.
Well, there could be any number of funding options available.
Such as?
Such as, again, changing the mix. Oh, if you're asking the types of funding options that are available, this is generally the type of funding option array that's available, and in what quantity, that really depends on the negotiations and how each jurisdiction participates in the process.
So thank you, Mr. Cole. So what we're saying is there really are no funding options. The question is, how do we split up the funding among the options?
Yeah, that's probably fair.
So, for example, the tolling, which right now is $1.50 each way, I've seen in some of these documents that it could be as high as $4 each way. That would be a way to split it up, wouldn't it?
Sure.
Okay. So I also see that when we're talking about the funding, again, at this point it's hypothetical, but a question that was asked was, if you toll on the new bridge, will you have to toll on the current bridges? And the answer was yes. So theoretically, we could go as high as $4 each way going across the new bridge and $4 each way going across the current bridges.
And what you illustrate is the...
I'm sorry, that's yes? That's yes?
No, because the full answer is actually more than just monosyllabic.
Okay.
Because there is a range of tolls, not only as fixed tolls, but also a range of tolls that can vary by time of day.
Congestion pricing.
Right. The whole concept of tolling, and because it's not been studied fully, and that report that we attached is pretty simplistic in saying, here's a flat fee, here's our analysis. The one that brings in the most revenue was like, what, $2.80 per crossing. So there is a range, and it's not been settled, if there's tolling at all. When the Selwood Bridge was built, it was built, and there is no tolling on the Selwood Bridge. and it's about $300 million. So they're very, that's, yes.
So if there was no tolling on the Selwood Bridge, and my recollection is that either Clackamas County or one of the other counties has said, we're not paying for it, even though we use it all the time. There might be some analogies here, I'm not sure. But if we don't use tolling, are we going to have to increase the gas tax? Are we going to have to increase the vehicle registration fee? Are we going to have to increase the property tax?
I think, again, Counselor, those will be decisions made by the city council and quite possibly the voters, as well as the various agencies that help fund it. I think, again, we're heading down a hypothetical path. I think your point's well made,
Yeah.
but
Well,
your point has been made.
I made my point. I don't see that this is a hypothetical plan, because I ask if there are other options, and they're not. We just have to rotate them among these.
Counselor, can I partially answer this question?
Sure.
Can you hear me?
A little closer, Mike.
Okay. So I remember being at this meeting and Counselor Clem at the time coming up with this and on our whiteboard in our offices. And if you actually add up all these totals, the 40, 150, $555,000, $550 million, which is more than the 430. It was to give a range, a general idea of what are the sources. So obviously 555 is bigger than 430, meaning you could just about eliminate the tolling from this as an option and use all the other ones at their max or increase them. It's just to give a range, not necessarily we're going to do each one of these specifically to this level. Obviously, the state one is a estimate of what you may get from the state. We've seen projects much bigger than 150 go forward by the state, so it's just to give some ranges.
And as we talked about earlier, in fact, the slide previous to this, the project can be phased. So it could very well be you're not trying to raise enough money to fund the entire project, including the elevated roadways coming across and linking with Eola and Rosemont. You could be targeting a lower number to do one or more phases. Again, an option, an opportunity for a future council decision, should you choose that.
Then, just one more
No, go
follow-up, and
ahead.
I'll have a bunch of other questions on other issues, but I want other councilors to go. Mr. Jaffe, you were talking about money that potentially comes from the state up to $100 million. Isn't the region's adopted budget for roadway expansion, doesn't that give to the Salem-Kaiser area $435 million from all sources, local, state, and federal, over the next 20 years?
Actually, I think it's a lot higher. I think we answered that in here. And also, half of that is for, the 425 is divided up. So I think we did over $1 billion is what we estimate over the next 23 years, $1 billion.
Is that the RTP?
Mm-hmm. The
And
one that we're
that
preparing,
goes further than 20 years?
the one we're preparing for the next adoption, which is in 2019.
So even using the higher figures, the $435 million of this project, how much of that would be included in the region's adopted budget?
In that $425 million that we do for capital, we have $20 million that we say would be available for this project. So this is obviously assuming funds that we don't assume in our 20-year period. When we do it in RTP, we don't assume that the state will come up with X amount of dollars. No plan can assume the state is going to provide that kind of funds in its forecast.
Because right now, the state has assumed $20 million. That's
Well,
all
not the
it's
state.
committed?
This is coming from our known sources. So we do revenue forecasts of what the MPO gets, what the cities get, what the counties get, and that adds up to the, like I said, over $1 billion. Half or more is used for operation and maintenance and preservation, the other half for capital. But obviously, areas do get large sums of money for significant projects. The bridge you just mentioned, the Selwood Bridge, was an earmark from HB 2001 and 2009. We've seen other large projects, the Newburgh-Dundee bypass down in the Medford
That's for
area.
$500 million, isn't it?
Sorry?
Newburgh-Dundee is $500 million?
No, I think it was 200 million or so. 192.
A little closer to, well, 192 out of the JTA, but about 240, I think, total is what we ended up approximately with that project.
For Phase 1.
Correct.
Medford's Highway 62.
For
I think
Phase
is,
1.
Medford Highway 62, which is just about to be completed, was $200 million, I believe. So we have examples of large earmarks, for lack of a better word, large named projects that the state has done. We didn't include that in our estimates, but that's obviously a potential source to go to the legislature with a request.
I'm still marveling that we're talking in these huge numbers when we haven't got a design, we don't have a bridge, we don't have anything in place. I find it a little interesting that it's suddenly valued at such tremendous amounts when we haven't got a plan yet except to talk about phases. I think this gets problematic as you start talking about these projects in these absolute numbers when you're talking about an envelope of space where you could legally put a bridge. Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't want to belabor the funding issue, but again, it's my understanding that we can't approach the federal or state government for funds until we have a record of decision, in which we do not. Secondly, and maybe to make this simple, I'd like to ask ODOT representative and the Federal Highway representative, is the Oregon Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration actively involved in any bridge building? Do you build bridges?
Yes, sir, we do.
The federal,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to go back, Mr. Chandler, to what you were talking about earlier when a decision came before a previous council on whether to accept the recommendation, and I don't remember which number it was, a 2A or 4B.
4D.
4D.
4D is in Delta.
Thank you. And that the council at the time considered that option, and they said no.
Correct.
And at the time, they had the choice of saying, we'd like something, we say no to this, we'd like something else. They had other options available to them.
That's correct.
Why did they have other options available to them and we have yes or no?
It depends on where you were in the process. At this point, the
Help
draft
me understand
environmental
that.
impact statement had come out. Alternative 4D had been proposed as a preliminary preferred alternative, seeking feedback from the jurisdictions. Because the bridge and those supporting structures are in Salem, we had the lead in giving feedback. As I said before, City Council was very concerned about the impacts and the cost for alternative 4D. And so that counter proposal for alternative 4D to what became the preferred alternative was possible in large measure because it fit. It still fit the same footprint, it had the same landings, Hickory and Hickory and Pine, and Hope on the other side. So it wasn't an entirely new location. It was an entirely new configuration. It really started with the big 4D and scaled it down to fit our community. And that's why we could do it that way. And the work had not yet been done on the final environmental impact statement.
Yeah,
I mean, look at
the
guys
Salem
who've been
alternative is really just a modification of alternative 4D. It's a downsizing of 4D, but it's working, as Robert said, within the same envelope, basically the same footprint, same sort of impacts. So it's not like a new alternative was surfaced. It was really a modification of the alternative that had been proposed.
Yeah. Good question.
Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question, Mr. Chandler, about TGM. I see that they're not represented on the panel today, and I know that they do some work, transportation growth management, with the state of Oregon. I was just wondering how that department interacts with this process and why they're not represented on this panel, how they might support or want some different processes there. If anyone's able to speak to how they interact with TGM or how TGM has interacted with this process.
TGM is a joint program that ODOT runs with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. It's a grant funding program, mostly used with small jurisdiction projects like transportation system plans and the like. TGM does not really get into project development issues. That really happens after the system planning. We get into the project planning. So your TSP and previous system planning processes led to the desire to move forward with a project planning process. So the TGM program folks, the TGM staff, wouldn't really be involved in this level of work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then also I have a question for Mr. Jaffe about the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. In talking about the Selwood Bridge and this funding, I know we've had several conversations about this project. Can you please explain to me how with the Newburgh-Dundee bypass process, how that may have affected livability within that jurisdiction, and how the funding, not just the funding, with respect to hypotheticals, as Mr. Mayor was saying.
We're moving way
but
out of the bridge
process.
discussion here, Counselor.
Well, I don't know that I understand this, and it's been brought up several times. I see the Selwood Bridge, but the Newburgh-Dundee bypass has been brought up a lot about, here's an example for a project and how it worked for an area. So I'm asking, how did it work? How was that process? And how do you see the similarities with Salem?
Well, I think I should defer to ODOT on that.
Sorry.
The only thing I want to quickly say is it's an example of a very large project that is being phased. And they've only completed phase one, and now they're looking for additional phases going forward. Terry, do you want to chime in on Newburgh-Dundee?
I can, or Sonny, if you'd like to.
Yeah, so Newburgh-Dundee has had a strong, supportive local base, if you will. A portion of that community who strongly supported the project, they've done lobbying at both the state and the federal level. They continue to do so to fund future phases, in fact. And the local communities did contribute to the phase one project. So that was just a situation where that community rallied around the project. They made the choices necessary to identify the project, to contribute match money, and to take the appropriate land use actions and modifications to the local street network and impacts to other city facilities, county facilities that were necessary in order to make that project function. You're in the same process. I think you're having a little bit more of a struggle about whether you want to proceed forward or not. But this is the process as it's supposed to happen. The community is really the ones who should be making the choice about whether the bridge is the right solution for them or not. You're in the same process as Newburgh-Dundee. You just haven't reached the finish line on your document yet.
How many years did that Newburgh-Dundee project take to get? It seemed to me, I remember discussion of it when I was in the legislature. I mean, going back a long time. So I'm trying to remember how long that took.
Well, I'm not going to ask you how long a time you're talking about, but I can tell you the process that we are currently still in, because as Sonny said, we've done the first phase. There are really two other phases left to go, so we've got about a third of it down. The process we're currently in, you could probably trace its roots back to the specific process to about 1997.
Yeah.
That's when the first sort of new era alternatives analysis document was produced, but they've actually been working, that community has been working about 35 plus years to make that project a reality, and it had extremely strong support from all the local jurisdictions.
Could you, just out of curiosity, you talk about this in phases, which has been one of the things that I have found difficult in the discussion of this bridge. So often, it's talked about in a kind of full-blown, build it tomorrow kind of project, but aren't these large projects generally done in phases? I mean, how does that work when you want to phase your way into them?
Well, I'll take a quick shot at that, but I might ask my federal partners to talk a little bit about phasing, because phasing is a difficult I guess, process to grasp, because you really have to look at each phase as to whether or not it's going to have independent utility. If we build this and don't ever do anything else, does it have value? That's really the question you have to answer when you are proposing to do phasing. Okay. So if you look at a large project in total and are able to answer the question that, yes, we could do this bit, and if that's all we ever get done, it'll still be a positive value, that's how you really move towards phasing.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike or Phil, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, that's one of the key questions that from the federal requirements for a finance plan to move forward for those construction funds. Is there a financing plan for that phase that will have independent utility, not the entire project?
Right. Okay, thank you. Councilor Kaiser.
Thanks. I have a question to kind of follow up on that one. So if we just wanted to build what I call the first phase, I think you had it numbered there, but it just the bridge part, not the connection to Highway 22. We could do that. Would there be an obligation, though, to eventually complete the project down the road at some point in time?
Figuratively and literally?
You know, I'll just add that, you know, as you develop a project, and you're developing it through this process, public involvement process, you know, that is to some degree, well, it isn't entirely, it's a commitment to the public. You know, you're saying, this is our project, this is what we commit to building. And so, is it a commitment? Yes.
Okay, but I'm asking, is it a requirement?
FHWA's requirement is that a project move to construction or right-of-way acquisition within 10 years of starting.
Okay, so I get what you're saying
And a
as far
project-
as the
but no-
commitment. But could you just build one phase, a self-contained phase, and then just stop at that? Or is there a requirement by FHWA to actually build what you said you were going to build in the final EIS, in the record of decision?
There is not a requirement to build what is totally depicted in the final FEIS.
So we would have the choice among those pieces of, in the final EIS to construct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
As long as they're self-contained?
Well,
And have utility?
independent utility is the phrase,
Among
yes.
themselves, they have utility?
Yes.
Okay.
How long is the EIS good? I mean, is it a 40-year, 50-year? How long are you allowed to use it as your basis for?
Let me give you just one quick example. We've been working off of the Hayesville to Battle Creek EIS for I-5 since 1989. Basically, you have to go through a reevaluation process when you want to bring it back and use it to prove that what you're intending to do is the impacts are still similar, and we get federal highway approval for that. So I think the window on a reevaluation is 3 years. So we'd have to come back and look at it if it was more than 3 years old and do a reevaluation process.
Is
But
there any-
you can use them basically until you're finished.
Till you're finished? Okay, so how old is the NEPA law that you operate under for these EIS? I mean, does that go back into the 60s or 70s? How does that-
1970, January 1, 1970.
Yeah. Are there any of those still alive being used?
Don't know.
Could be, huh? They're not done.
Could be, none that I think we're using. I think the
Okay.
I-5 one is probably the oldest one
I
we're
was
still
thinking
working off
maybe
of.
I-5, I don't know. Yes, Counselor.
While
You, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I have a question just to the panel in general. I know I've been watching wide-eyed with the Alaskan Viaduct project up in Seattle. I always used to say where civil engineers move, how to not build infrastructure. But having lived there pre-Amazon, I was going to ask in relation to projects like NATO Parkway, where communities are working to take out the freeways from downtown, taking traffic off of that downtown infrastructure, making it more walkable and bikeable. How does a project like this figure in? Because as Councilor Kaiser was saying, and as Councilor Hoy was saying, you know, we seem to have different options about where we were going to go. As Mr. Mayor said, we don't even have this project yet. How do you see this particular 4D or the Salem alternative working along those lines, that trend to sort of take the regional traffic out of the downtown area? And if that were to happen, could the Center Marion Bridge be local bridges if we had, would that eventually be the case where we would then have ownership, ODOT wouldn't have ownership of those anymore? Would that be another MOU?
I will start and look for the nonverbal cues from the panel here. You had several kind of points within that question. One of them, there is an interest in traffic engineering to actually remove roadways for a lot of different reasons and evaluation. It's a growing practice, and and there's a risk in applying lessons learned from different jurisdictions to another. Among the things that is unique, no, I shouldn't say unique, but one special thing for Salem is that if you want to cross the Willamette River in our town, you've got to drive downtown and cross at one of those bridges or go in the other direction. And so to add one of the ideas of if you, how to say this, if you remove different roadways or enhance, people will find other ways around for the traffic to meet their needs. We don't have any other ways. But so that is a hard one. It would have to be studied on at what point do we want to stop building more roads. In your report, there was there's a graphic that shows basically Salem road projects over the last 40 years. And if the Salem City Council had decided 40 years ago that the right tact to take is stop building roadways, we would be very different now than we are.
I think, just to clarify, I'm not saying to stop building roads. Let me be clear on that. And also, just the fact that 99 goes right in front of the park. The fact that 22, no matter how many lanes wide 22, or let me, Center and Marion, no matter how many lanes wide we make that particular funnel, it still puts us into a street grid that has limited capacity.
You're right, absolutely right.
So lots of cities, and with respect, they all have their issues. They're saying, you know, let's take that traffic out of downtown. How does this project figure into that?
Okay. So this project, should the preferred alternative be built, does redistribute the congestion. It moves some of the traffic, now has the opportunity to go by that north route. If that's your question. I'm not sure, Councilor. Okay, try
If
again.
I can add.
Help me, Phil.
I would simply say that, you know, transportation projects these days are thought of in the context of community. They truly are. And what serves the community, every project is a little different and serves a little different purpose. I think the project we're speaking of today, again, it serves a certain purpose in that overall context. But, you know, the community involvement is very much a piece of, again, understanding what the community needs and desires are, and then addressing those.
Thank you.
Councilor Nanki?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to re-clarify that essentially the final EIS is a license to build to the maximum if we so chose to build to the maximum. Whereas 4D, we could have still came to what the Salem alternative is and never built out all the way to 4D. But it's a license to build up to that level.
If I'll just simply say that it is an articulation in a point of time of a project that you believe is needed for the community and that you're intent on building. Now, once you pass that final EIS and get into development, construction, years can pass, things change, projects change,
right.
And those things are allowed to happen through the process. So it's not cut in stone. It's again, it's at a point in time what you believe from analysis is the best solution for the purpose, solving the purpose and need.
And if I may?
Yes.
Longer one in that respect. Say we choose not to move forward with the remaining issues regarding the LUBA remand. And it's the desire of council to locate a bridge in a different location, which would start the process all over again. That time period would be similar, at least 13 years. And what is the likelihood that, or the timing, that we could re-enter into that knowing that we just abandoned a 13-year process? Would people come to the table next year to start over?
Well, nobody's raising their hand, Brad. I think you got your answer.
Councilor, speaking for ODOT, we always want to be good partners with our local entities. If you make a choice not to move forward with the preferred alternative, I think there's some, important ramifications there. We have to finish a document so that we are not jointly, as communities, with our SCATS members responsible for paying back some federal funds. We take care of that. But let's say in 2 years, by one of these local funding measures or some other mechanism, the city now has the money in hand to start a new process. If you wanted to engage with ODOT and talk about starting a new process, we'd be willing to sit down with you. I think if you wanted us to contribute funding to that project, we might give pause, right? We're already spent a lot of money on a solution for another bridge in the Salem area. I want to say, yes, we want to be partners with you and make sure that you're really serious this time, and that, there's a good likelihood that we're going to come to a conclusion, a positive outcome. Well, I shouldn't say positive outcome, because no build can be considered a positive outcome. It is an allowable outcome through the NEPA process. And you're about to help make that choice. But, we want to be your partners. I would say we would come to the table, at least at preliminary discussions with you about, what do you have in mind? How much time would that take? How much would the studies cost? Are you really serious this time? And then we'd have to talk to FHWA and see what their thoughts were on that.
Councilor Case?
Thank you. I just want to respond to Mr. Chickering, because I think that part of the process, it's been 13 years, but it has been a process. And my understanding of process is that you arrive at some type of decision. The decision's not predetermined. I would hope that ODOT allows us to go through a process and make a decision and not penalize us later for the decision that we make, especially if we complete the process. So I hope I'm hearing you correctly in that coming out with whatever decision it is that ODOT would still be open to partnering in the future, knowing that, we are serious. I think the "Are you serious this time" is a bit derogatory, because I think it has been very serious, and I think the reason why we're here is because of the process and public input and engagement. So I guess I just want to be clear that an EIS doesn't have to result in something other than a no build, and I guess I just want to make sure that my understanding of that is correctly, that is an allowable outcome of a process.
Yes, Counselor, absolutely, it is allowable. We have no problem with either outcome. We just need an outcome by the deadline. And my comments about whether ODOT would contribute funding to the next round of a study was not meant to be punitive. It's simply, I think, an honest reflection of our budgeting and the many needs that are on our system. And there are many other communities who would like us to expend funds on studies in their areas. So those are all things that we would have to take into account.
Councilor Anderson.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to follow up on that whole issue as well as the phasing issue. Now, if I don't have this right, I am sure, and I would appreciate if you would tell me, but it seems to me this whole thing started as a land use process, a land use planning process. And included in that is obviously transportation. How we're going to deal with our evolving transportation and land use needs as the city grows. And then part of that was the EIS. That's part of the land use planning process. It's just one important function of the land use process. So the decision that was made was that the best way to deal with the goal of alleviating congestion on the Center Street and Marion Street bridges and on the connecting highway and arterial street systems was that we needed to build a 4-lane bridge. So if then we decide we're only going to do, as Mr. Ditzler says, if we're going to do one independent phase, then we're not achieving the goal that we set out to of alleviating congestion, because I would guess that a 2-lane bridge is going to cause more congestion on the bridge, getting on and off the bridge, than a 4-lane bridge would. Is that a correct assessment?
Not exactly. I think what you're looking at is, again, with the phasing, you're looking at moving in the direction of. So if you're making positive progress towards implementing what it is that you've said you were intending to do, then that's fine. And it can take a long time, bit by bit, to put together the money that you need to do these things, but if you're making positive progress and moving in that direction. Now, I wanted to point out one other thing. the metric for this project in the purpose and need statement was, in terms of operational efficiency or mobility, was that it be better than nothing. That is, that whatever the outcome was at the end of the planning horizon, that whatever we did was better than having done nothing. That's a fairly low bar for congestion. The real focus of the project was the redundancy and the safety, finding something that would give us an alternative to the two existing bridges.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cole. I'd like to follow up on that, but I just will say that I think what you're saying, as long as we're making progress, under your view, in order to achieve the goals in the best possible way, we would have to continue to make progress and put in the second bridge, the second two-lane bridge.
Well, again, I think as Mr. Ditzler pointed out earlier, as long as we're making positive progress and moving in the direction of, that can be a very long time, and we could get to a point in the future where we reconsider the whole proposition. What we've done up to date has been done with independent utility. It had purpose, it had value, but we would not necessarily be held accountable or be required to follow through with the full package.
Okay, now if I could follow up on the second part, let's talk about the low bar of doing nothing. Let's look at page 48 of the Salem River Crossing, the questions and answers, where on section B, and then you can see it on table 21, 22, and 23, the impacted intersections under the current conditions, 4 of 27 don't meet the mobility targets, 2 of the 8 downtown don't. Under the no bridge alternative, 16 of 32 would not meet the mobility targets. And under the preferred alternative, 17 of 33 would not meet the mobility targets. So does that even jump over the low bar? We went from 16 out of, how so?
Well, how so? Because, again, I think Mr. Chandler referred to it earlier. A lot of what is going on when you look at comparing intersections to intersections, there are large intersections, there are small intersections. When you redistribute traffic to intersections that currently have almost no traffic or very little traffic, you're going to see an increase in congestion at that location. You will see improvements in other areas. So it really is a balancing act. On the average, on the aggregate, at the end of the 20-year planning horizon, it was determined that overall the operations were slightly improved. So
Slightly.
Slightly.
Okay, then, but
Yes, sir.
let's look at figure 23. It seems like if you look at figure 21, which is the existing conditions, then figure 23, which is what you would have with the preferred alternative, all the problems are on the right-hand side, the majority of the problems on the right-hand side in northeast Salem. And with the no-build alternative, it seems like the problems are spread out throughout the entire city. Is that a correct analysis of that map? Those maps?
I think you see improvements around the bridgeheads, and where you have the new movements around the Pine Street area, you do have more congestion than you have
Okay.
today because there's more traffic being drawn to that location.
So we're exchanging problems at one set of intersections, which are on the west side of the river, for problems with another set of intersections that are on the east side of the river. The only difference is, to move it to the east side, we're going to be paying $425 million for the bridge.
Well, actually, if you look at the figure 23 on the east side, there's significant improvement around the bridgehead on the east side of the river.
They're all red.
Right.
No, I'm talking about at the existing Marion Center Street bridges.
Yeah, of course. I agree with that, yeah.
There's improvement there.
Yeah, and there's,
And there is a bigger problem or more congestion where the new bridge ties in. But that's trade-off. And again, that's a decision that council needs to make as to whether or not that's an appropriate trade-off.
Mr. Cole, you mentioned the goals for this project. They were early on what prompted this. What were the we hear a lot about congestion. That's the most common discussion. What else was going on that prompted this? Do you recall what's in that goal statement?
And My colleague, Mr. Fricke, is probably more able to give you more
Okay.
detail about the purpose and need, but the initial discussions that we had around the project were really driven by the concern over just having the two bridges, the single crossing, the West Salem area being the principal residential growth area for the community, and needing another option for safety and redundancy's sake in case of emergencies. Those sorts of concerns were really, I think, the big driver early on with this project, and the objective with congestion was not to meet our Oregon Highway Plan mobility targets. It was really, we've got to do something to, again, I think the impetus at the time was we've got to do something that gives us another choice, and whatever we do, we have to make sure that we don't leave it worse off than when we began. Individual intersections notwithstanding, again, obviously, when you redistribute traffic, you're going to have some places to get a little worse. And overall, though, our assessment is that it's gotten better.
Could I summarize that as essentially safety and resiliency? I mean, in terms
Yes.
of the future of this community on both sides of the river?
That'd be a good summary.
Yeah,
Yes.
And
rather
also-
than congestion and whether it takes 15 minutes or an hour to get from one place to another.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Hoy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following up on that issue, could somebody correct me if I misunderstood this, but I thought I read in the report that the seismic capacity of a new bridge was factored into the contingency part of the budget and not actually part of the framework of the budget, and that really was taking up for out of the potential overruns or extra costs. And did I understand that correctly?
You read that correctly. The way that the cost estimating is done is by unit prices. We talked about that in the report. Those unit prices are multiplied by the numbers of units. And then there's a very healthy contingency, 40% in this case. And that's because there are an awful lot of both known unknowns and, heaven forbid, unknown unknowns. Everything from issues related to seismic resiliency, archaeology issues, topography, all those different things. And that contingency is designed at this early stage to account for those and give you that flexibility. That's where it came from.
Thank you. I understand the concept of contingency, and it's a great concept, especially in this day and age when we have escalating costs and things. But what I don't understand is if resiliency was our primary goal or one of our primary goals, why wasn't the cost of making it resilient factored into the base cost of the bridge and not taken out of a contingency budget? It doesn't make sense to me.
So looking at my colleagues over here, did you want?
I think to the extent that we can account for that cost, again, the meeting seismic standards is we were just discussing, that's sort of baked into the estimation process. We wouldn't make an estimate for a non-seismically sound facility and then come back later and try to guess what it would really cost to make it seismically sound. That's just a baseline part of the process. So I don't understand where the statement that you're making was coming from, but we would not assume that we would ever construct anything that did not meet seismic requirements.
But I thought I had understood you, Mr. Chandler, to agree with me. So I'm confused now.
Well, that was our Julie, you coming up?
Julie Warnicki, Transportation Planning Manager. I would just say that maybe to try to clarify, there is not a line item that says seismic resiliency and has this cost. It is part of the unit prices. When we look at unit prices for doing similar projects, they also have to be built to seismic standards. And so that's really how it gets built in. And then the contingency is, if there's something beyond what those unit prices would account for that we, really didn't know about, that's where that comes in.
So you bring up a good point. We'll look at that and see whether it should be rewritten in a revised version, because I can understand how that sounds differently. We can fix that.
It concerns me because I'm not sure that we have any wiggle room because we want to build a seismically sound bridge, obviously. And so if we already take up any contingency just to do that, then I was left thinking that we didn't have any contingency or a diminished contingency.
Right, and could probably have been written better in the report, and we'll get together on how to make that more clear, that the unit prices and what is included and what is not specific to seismic resiliency and design.
Thank you. This is an issue that's really, really important to me, so I would really want to know this. It'll help me make it a decision.
And contingency estimates would cover more than seismic concerns. We have contingency baked into our estimates because there are an awful lot of things that you don't know at this stage of design. We're looking at about a 30% design. There's lots more design that would happen in the preliminary final design work. When you actually get down on the ground, start looking at things, you're going to find things that you did not anticipate, and that's what the contingency is there to cover.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could someone expand on the seismic retrofitting or updating on the Marion Street Bridge in relation to the resiliency? Center Street.
That's okay.
Bridge in relation to the resiliency and safety that's been brought up. If we already have a bridge, if we already have some financing for updating, how is this affecting that process? How is one? We talked about trade-offs, so we're not going to say better or right or wrong. We're going to say better or worse. What are the trade-offs on this and moving forward?
So, Councilor, I have the project information page in front of me here. We do have funding that's been set aside for Center Street Bridge. Seismic retrofit. Right now, we're in a study phase to determine what work would need to be done to the Center Street Bridge. The legislature with House Bill 2017, they have allocated $60 million for retrofit improvements, $10 million for design and project management, and $50 million for construction. But that construction would not occur until 2025. So that's the current project that we have in the state now.
And this is a normal timeline for any transportation project, 20, 30 years for safety and resiliency? Just to, these timelines seem to stretch out, and they seem like a long time to me, but whenever I talk to anyone in this field, they say it's right around the corner. It's super fast considering the process.
Yeah, people are surprised by the length of time it takes to fund a project and then actually get to construction. Part of that has to do, we have a 3 or 4 year STIP process. That's our statewide transportation improvement program. And generally every 3 to 4 years, we'll scope projects for the next STIP. For example, right now, my staff is out scoping projects that will go into the 21-24 STIP. So those projects will get selected about a year from now and added to that program document, but generally they'll be added to years 23 and 24. The last 2 years of that document, the first year or two, will already have projects in it. In this particular case, the House bill funding, because it comes in over time, wasn't a bonding measure where the money was available immediately. The money has to trickle in through those revenue sources, and we were provided a list of projects with a target year by the Joint Committee on Transportation, and that's where this 2025 date came from.
So since you already own that portion of the bridge, since it's state highway, you already have the funds, albeit not all at once, but you have the funds earmarked to be able to improve that section, to make sure it's seismically upgraded, to make sure that it's safe. What's the timeline for that implementation?
It's scheduled for construction in 2025.
For the whole bridge, not in a phase?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilor Lewis?
I just want to make sure in the studies, the plans, and the graphs that are on page 49 to 51, the assumption is through the 20-year period to 2040 that both the Marion and State Street bridges will be remain useful and active.
That's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Councilor Anderson?
I want to get back to the limbo bar. How low or high can we go? And that, to me, relates to the what are we going to get at the end of spending whatever amount of money we spend. So on the material we got tonight, on the congestion task relief force, there was some study done on the PM peak hour travel times and AM peak hour travel times over the bridge. And as I look at it, on almost every one, it's, well, I'll just give you some examples. On the AM travel times, going from A to E, you're going to spend, instead of 11 minutes, you're going to spend 15 minutes, so 4 more minutes under the no bridge. And you save 1 minute instead of under the preferred alternative. So if the preferred alternative is built, instead of 11 minutes going from A to E, you're going to take 10 minutes to go from A to E. And I don't know if Mr. Chandler or somebody, or Mr. Jaffe, who has that. Is that a correct reading of that?
No, because we're not talking in the congestion relief task force about the preferred alternative. This is not comparing the no build with a preferred alternative. In this case, the build scenario, that was that solutions package that was discussed at the congestion relief task force, but not put forward as a recommendation. And that involved, for example, widening, adding a lane to both bridges,
So you're
widening
saying
Wall Street
that means if we do nothing?
Right.
Okay, so.
So this is not related to that.
The proposed bridge is out of the picture here.
On this, yes.
Okay. So if the bridge were put in, are you saying the time would be lower?
I don't know.
Okay. Then let's look at page 75.
Councilor Anderson?
Sure.
If I can just add a little
Sure,
bit
please.
to that. The expectation, if you look at the timeframes on this, you're looking at an AM peak, actually, I think those are the numbers you're referring to, in 2018. And with the congestion task force looking at all the different measures that was looked at by that group, which did not include a new bridge, they were looking at a 2028.
Yes, I understand
A
that.
10-year timeframe, okay? And it would probably take 10 years to put it in place. So essentially, you're just sort of keeping your nose above water over that 10 years if you were, in fact, to follow these improvements. The comparison maybe with the river crossing is that in the 20-plus year planning horizon, we would basically be looking at a situation or a congestion situation that was somewhat similar to the way it is today. The difference is it would be better than it would be if we had done the no-build, but it's not like it's going to cure all the congestion problems.
No,
Okay?
because.
So you're buying yourself essentially 20-plus years of it not getting worse than it is today.
All right, so I'm looking at page 75, and on your bullets for your OD pairs, the average travel times in 2040 for the preferred alternative are approximately equal to existing conditions in 2012. That's correct?
Approximately, as I understand it, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's 0.4 of a minute, which is 24 seconds. So we're spending all this money to end up right where we are right now in 2040.
Well, as opposed to not making the investment and having it be considerably worse than that.
Well, I understand, and that is what we're looking at is 14 minutes in that situation. It'll be 14 minutes worse in 2040 if there's no build. That's what you're.
On average, Counselor, on average.
Yeah.
This is from the air quality report, where they looked at 5 locations on the east side and 5 on the west, or approximately that many. And they said, what are the travel times between those pairs? They have 23 pairs. And what will it be? What is it today? What is it in no build? And that's where you get the average of 27 minutes. And what will it be in the preferred alternative? That's where you get 14 minutes.
Yeah.
So that difference, that delta between 27 minutes as an average travel time, the no build, and 14 with the build is the difference.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffe. So I can't remember who said this. I think it was either Mr. Chickering or Mr. Ditzler, that these are the kind of decisions that the council has to make on a policy level. That is it worth saving 14 minutes average 20 years from now to spend the money on the bridge that we're talking about?
Yes.
And
Okay,
travel time is
okay.
just one component of the purpose and need.
Yeah, I understand that.
Right, and I will just add that it depends on the metric that City Council wants to evaluate, the set of metrics to look at, because you look at congestion numbers, you can look at vehicle miles traveled, you can look at vehicle hours delay, you can look at the emissions from the tailpipe emissions. There are a lot of different factors to consider on whether to go forward with a preferred alternative or not. There is, as I look through this thing here and I try to summarize them in the final table of your report, there is no specific, clear-ringing, rational, do this or do that. There's a whole host of different things. I've talked about that as well. So it is complicated, and it's not a simple decision, but it's more than just one or two factors to consider.
Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about a couple of those, and I'm going to go back to the purpose statement of the Salem River crossing, which was to improve mobility and safety. We haven't talked about safety at all tonight. I'd like some comments about the safety aspect of the preferred alternative versus the no build.
I think Julie and I could probably answer that together. So some of the components of the safety was just the existing conditions and the congestion on the bridges and the extra weaving on the bridges is a concern. I think also in the safety, they're looking at multimodal conditions. You have a lot more congestion in the downtown area. How does that affect pedestrians? How does it affect people on bikes, et cetera? There's another purpose in the statement about transit. How does that affect transit? With one of the need statements to assist in more efficient transit routes and travel times. So and safety could also be related to the having a bridge that is seismically upgraded, the community safety. Julie, you want to talk about community safety and the redundancy issue?
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I mean, the system redundancy is a big part of overall safety. I guess other aspect I wanted to put in there was on the multimodal with the safety. It was very important in the preferred alternative that separate bicycle and pedestrian facilities be provided. And so on the proposed new bridge, there would be separated bike ped facilities with connections to a separated path along the east side of Marine Drive that would then include a path that went up along those ramps and joined in with the Edgewater pathway. So there would be sort of a whole long connection of multimodal paths.
As opposed to what we have today, which is not.
Councilor Kaiser.
Thank you. So I want to get back to the issue, kind of to follow on the purpose of the project. And at the very, very end of it, I'm looking at the draft EIS purpose statement on page ES-2. At the very end, it says alleviating congestion on the Center Street and Mary Street bridges and on the connecting highway and arterial street system. So I want to get back to this idea of we theoretically could just build the bridge and not build a connection to Highway 22. And it seems that theoretically we could do that, but we wouldn't be following the purpose of this project, it seems, if we did that. And I'm not sure how that would be codified. So I'm wondering if somebody could speak to, say we just wanted to build a crossing, have it end at River Bend, and not make any other connections. How would we even do that and make sure it's codified so that that's all that we do?
Julie?
I guess what I hear you saying is that you might want a preferred alternative that is something less than the preferred alternative that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I was asking the question earlier about could we just build just the bridge and not the existing Highway 20? Could we build that facility that's self-contained and not make the separate, phase facility connection to Highway 22? And the answer previously was yes. And now I'm wondering, well, practically, how would you go about doing that?
I mean, I think the answer is still yes, that you could, if you have independent utility, you could phase the project and construct that, sort of initial phase. I don't think that's the same thing as saying that you have a different preferred alternative.
And if I can say, I'll just say that, could you do that? Yes, you could do that. Is that the way the project was designed and intended? No. Why would you do that? You know, granted, there are things that are unforeseen that might cause you to do that, but going into it to codify something in this forum, you know, that would be problematic.
Okay, thanks. That's, if I could continue, I have a couple.
Oh, sure.
Unless you have.
No, go
okay.
ahead.
So talking about the connection to Highway 22, Councilor Lewis brought up earlier about the Rosemont exit. My understanding is that the facility of the connection to Highway 22 would mean that in order to build that part of the project, the Rosemont exit would have to be studied, evaluated, and eventually closed because it's too close to when it merges or the ramp comes down or something like that. But the Rosemont, in order to make that connection, Rosemont exit will be closed.
That is correct. Something has to happen where Rosemont and Eola and that Highway 22 interface has to happen prior to building that connection with Highway 22 and Marine Drive.
Okay, so in order to make that, just to be clear, the Highway 22 connection is Rosemont exit will not exist.
I don't know what the configuration would be.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know. That would have to be studied. I will read in the land use actions that were taken in October was a provision in the Salem Transportation System Plan that specifically speaks to that. What it says is Salem River Crossing preferred alternative presents an additional need to work with ODOT to develop a facility plan for this section of Highway 22, the section I'm talking about. The ramp connection with the future Marine Drive Northwest to westbound Highway 22 would merge too close to the existing westbound exit for Rosemont Avenue Northwest. As a result, this exit would need to be closed or relocated. A facility plan for this stretch of Highway 22 will identify how best to provide access to and from the highway, and the city will not support closure of the exit of Rosemont Avenue Northwest until a facility plan has been adopted that addresses access to the southwest portion of West Salem. So that's in the transportation system plan as proposed, but under remand.
Okay, and that would also mean that the connection to Highway 22 would not be built until that exit was closed.
The connection from Marine Drive up there,
Right.
you would have to, yes.
Okay.
Councilor Nanki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following in that line, is Eola of sufficient distance to where that weaving movement would not be a concern?
It is our understanding that it is. However, we did not do that full analysis of what it would look like. And the main reason that we did not do that was because it was outside of what was called the area of potential impact that was identified for the EIS. So the reason that was not folded into the process was really less of a cost issue and more of we hadn't looked at any impacts in that area. And so to add that would have been a sort of a major scope creep. And that's why it needed the additional facility plan. I will say that when ODOT, when we work together with ODOT in partnership on their facility plans, ODOT does require that the local jurisdictions adopt those before they go to the Oregon Transportation Commission. So there is a loop in for city involvement. ODOT would not unilaterally adopt a facility plan that the city did not support.
Excellent, thanks.
Correct. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to shift a little bit to another topic that we haven't talked about much tonight, and that's I think I've read different things at various times, and I believe in the question and answer section, I read that there are going to be roughly 108 homes and businesses that would have to be acquired and removed for this project. And I can't remember what the mix is of homes and businesses off the top of my head. But I'm wondering, as it relates to the businesses, what would those businesses, how would they be compensated? Is it strictly the value of their land and the building? Is it loss of business? I don't know how that works. Can you explain that to me?
I can't explain it thoroughly because it's not my area of expertise. It's very similar to what we have done in our own city projects where we have to relocate a business because we need that right of way for a turn lane. And part of the question is, Can the business still work despite that we're taking some of the property away from them? And they're compensated for that, both for the property, or if it has to relocate the business, that is compensated as well. There's money set aside in the, there is fundings, I think it was $55 million to account for all of that, and we don't know which business they are.
I have a piggyback question for that. So, Mr. Chandler, when you contact those businesses, or not you personally, but when the city contacts those businesses, you're dealing with the property owners. If it's a renter in either those homes or a leasee in those businesses, do you make contact with those individuals as well? Or how is that, how are you making sure that the property owner is communicating to the person that's doing the business? Or is that strictly the onus is on the owner?
I don't know the answer. I don't know whether Julia's got, again, it's not something I work with regularly.
I actually think that I was going to look to ODOT to see, because I know that in the, I'll just say that in the draft environmental impact statement document, we have included as an appendix the right-of-way brochures that describe the right-of-way process, both in terms of acquisition and in terms of relocation assistance. And so I will look to Terry to see if he wants to add anything on that.
Not really much to add. Again, there is a process, a procedure we have to go through. I think much of it is really dictated by federal process in terms of what we are required to do when we go out to acquire property. And I'm not a right-of-way expert, so I don't know that I want to get into it any further than that. But again, you could look to the environmental document, the brochures that we provide to people, the process descriptions that we provide are readily available, and we can certainly provide those to you after the workshop today.
When the initial assessment was done, what was the ratio of property owners versus rental property, business property? Do you know, relatively in relation to business? And thank you, Councilman.
If he doesn't remember, I don't.
I don't think that owner versus renter is assumed when the right-of-way technical experts do their analysis. They do their best to, see, sometimes there'll be a building that might have 4 or 5 businesses in it. And so based on information available to them, that's how they make their assumptions, and they make it very clear in their analysis that at the time of acquisition, that number could change. You could have more or less.
Thank you.
So to follow up on my original question, where can I find the answer to better understand what the compensation entails? Like what's the scope? Was that in our, if it was in our packet, I missed it.
No, the details I don't believe were in the packet. You referenced something, a policy manual, Terry?
They have the.
If you,
We have it right
you don't need it
here.
right now, but I want to know that
Happy
before.
to get it to you.
We can certainly get it to you. What I heard was that they're actually, the brochures were either in one of the technical memorandum or in the document itself, but we'll get those to you.
Thank you.
So basically, the right-of-way process that ODOT goes through. Pardon me, I'm Lisa Nell. I'm the area manager for Area 3. I work at ODOT, Region 2. And the right-of-way process entails, we have certified right-of-way agents that go out and they work with consulting firms that do a fair market value assessment of property, and then people are compensated. We follow the Uniform Act, which is a federal law, and ensuring that everybody's rights are protected and that they get a fair market value for everything that is negotiated, including relocation, their property, and all of the things that are related to any type of access.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Just to follow up on that, if it came down to a situation where you were negotiating and we couldn't reach an agreement and it had to be taken under eminent domain, is that our process? Is that ODOT's process? Who would have to do that?
I'm not really sure what the city's capabilities are for acquiring property, but typically it's something that's decided as we're looking at the scope of the project, who does what.
Thank you. Thanks. I have one more question, unrelated to those. And it's back to something you said earlier, Mr. Chandler, sorry. It was during your opening. You talked about the roadway that would be going over the top of the Union Street Bridge.
Yes.
That's something that's troubled me since I think the first time you mentioned it, I can't remember how long ago it was, but a year and a half ago. And is there any way, in kind of incorporating Councilor Kaiser's question, is there any way that we could build this project that doesn't include a roadway going 12 feet over the Union Street Bridge? Or
Yes.
10 feet, whatever it is.
I mean, In that illustration, I had possible phasing. That's part of the phasing for the elevated roadways that link up into Highway 22. So at some point, the complete project would require some kind of elevated roadway to connect the new Marine Drive with Highway 22. And there would be a visual impact, and we gave you the illustration in the technical report, or the Q&A report. So yes, they would be there.
So I think the answer to my question is there is not a way to build the connection
Oh, I see.
without that.
I don't see how you can build a connection that flies up from Marine Drive and connects to Highway 22. There would still be connections prior to that being constructed by way of Wallace Road or all that. But at some point, should the project move toward final and complete completion, that would be constructed. And I don't think there are any alternatives to connect Marine Drive to a higher elevated Highway 22.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to follow up on 2 points to what Councilor Hoy said, and the first one again relates to the Union Street Bridge. I see figure 10 at page 15 of your report shows it, but it's not very close to where it is. You're not standing under it or close to it. It's kind of obscured by trees. But then all the way in the back on figure 8, page 17 of, gosh, I think it's the last report. I can't see what it is. It's too far back, but it's about 4 pages from the very end. There's a figure 6 that shows the projected footprint of the project is on all elevated structure in this figure. And looking at the scale, it looks like it will be at least 100 feet wide and be more than 100 feet at various places. I can show you I can get it to you, Robert.
I think I got it. It is page 17 of Appendix G, and that's looking at Wallace Marine Park and the 4F de minimis report, and that's where that is. I have not looked at this thing.
Okay. Well, I looked at the scale, and there's a scale down at the bottom, and it looks to me like it's easily 100 feet, and it could be more. So that is how wide that's going to be, 10 or 12 feet over the south end of the park and the bicycle pedestrian trail.
You're correct, and that's not really shown in that visual that we had in our report. This width on, again, page 17, figure 6 of Appendix G to the report, looking down, remember that elevated roadway is actually 2 lanes, one going one direction, one going the other. So that's where that came from. Your estimate could be very well spot on. I don't know.
Well, I think it's the estimate of whoever made it purple here.
Sure.
Then the phasing issue. I understand about independent utility, and Councilor Kaiser and some other people have asked, but let's say we just do phase 1, which is build the bridge to Marine Drive and Wallace Drive. But we then, or we just, I don't know if it's, I think it's just build the bridge. But, so we don't do Marine Drive, we don't do the flyover, we don't do anything else. Isn't what going to happen then if we don't actually do that? We're just going to be dumping a whole lot of traffic, a whole lot of more traffic on Wallace Road and on, well, just on Wallace Road. So how does that help relieve congestion, I guess, which is it's standing, does that make it independently useful?
Again, it would have independent utility because it would function. It would make a connection between one place and another. Whether or not that's an appropriate policy decision for the community to make ultimately, deliberately, to walk away from the rest of the project, that is, at that point, that would be your call to make, whether or not that was a prudent thing to do.
And one of the things we would certainly want to consider is the huge amount of traffic that is coming off that bridge and going onto a street that we haven't improved. Then I just have 2 more, Mr. Mayor, and then I'm running out of steam, and we're getting close to...
Close to 8 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm looking at the Eco Northwest report on page 13, which is the Salem River Crossing revenue projections, and I don't exactly know, again, what number that is.
That's Appendix E.
Appendix E. What it seems to say is that we've got congestion or decongestion, pricing decongestion. That is, if you toll the roads, less people use them. So, and it looks to me like a dollar toll drops traffic volumes by 27%. A $2.50 toll leads to a 52% reduction in volume, and a $4 toll leads to a 74% reduction in volume. So could we be building a bridge that nobody uses? Then the final...
Be an interesting policy decision.
Yeah.
I want to meet that council.
Yeah.
I could just quickly say that the purpose of that tolling was to look at a range of possible tolls, all the way up to potentially $4.
Right.
Not to recommend a $4 toll.
No, I understand
But just to
that.
see how that range plays out, both on the revenue side, but also on the travel side.
And I guess the real point I want to make, you toll, you're going to reduce the volume on it. That's just an accepted transportation planning thing.
It is, and congestion pricing and tolling is not my area of expertise, but certainly there are curves that show people's interest in traveling further to make the toll, motivations, different ways. It's complicated, which again is why I can't describe what the tolling would be because
Sure.
it's not been evaluated.
Now, I just have one final question, and that's on page 54 of the bid report. And it gets back to what is gained or what is lost by the no build or preferred alternative. And I'm looking at the table 7. The existing conditions right now, westbound Marion Street during AM peak is 70-foot average queue. The no build alternative in 2040, they're both in 2040. No build and well, that doesn't make sense to me, but what I'm looking at, no build alternative in 2040 is 70 feet. No build, or excuse me, the average queue under the build alternative is 65. So am I correct in thinking we're saving 5 feet in the average weight?
Well, you have to remember that this is AM over the Marion Street Bridge. There isn't that much volume in the in the AM direction over. So the queues are short, and the effect of moving traffic would be
de minimis,
small.
as I understand that.
The major effect is obviously in the PM for Marion Street.
Okay, so let's look at that, which is table 8. The no build alternative, the average queue would be 245 feet. Under the preferred alternative, the average queue would be 215 feet. So we're saving 30 feet or 3 cars.
Well, if you look at the note, it says the 95 percentile volume exceeds the capacity. Once you get queuing and volumes that exceed the capacity, you're going to get conditions where you really can't measure it. This is what the queuing software punches out. But even today, we see queues on Marion Street stretching way back past those numbers. This is just as a comparison using their software. But when we're out that kind of capacity, it'll be a lot longer.
Thank you.
Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the flyover that would go across the Union Street Bridge. It is, in my opinion, why we have Marine Drive as part of this program, so people could come off the Beltway, go across the bridge, and be on the new street, Marine Drive, and then go up over the bridge and be out of town. And there are ramifications of that. There would be as much as a 100-foot, if that's the length, bridge going across the Union Street Bridge at one particular point. My question is, for me, that seems to be livable. I walk the Union Street Bridge almost every day, and then walk to the new Minto Island Bridge, and I go under 2 large structures. And I don't see that affecting the quality of the park. I don't see it negatively affecting the businesses that are underneath those bridges. And I want to clarify that the 10-foot height is an absolute minimum. So it can't be less than 10 feet. And even on a bicycle, a 7'5" person isn't 10 feet tall.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like
There you
to
go.
ask a question rather than giving a statement.
Thank you.
I'm curious about Section 4F in the Union Street Bridge, because I saw in the report, this is the Salem River Crossing memorandum, so Appendix G, page 18, Section 4F use determination, and it says preferred alternative would not result in a Section 4F use of the Union Street Railroad head and bicycle trail, and I'm curious about that, how that was determined to not result in a Section 4F for the Union Street Bridge. Having been in a little bit familiar with Section 4F professionally, I know that we have Section 4F determinations for cell towers, for audio and visual. So I'm curious why this would not qualify for a Section 4F.
Hi, I'm Emily Klein with FHWA. So the use determination is based on whether the transportation project is converting or changing the use of the facility. And so Union Street Bridge, it is the flyover perhaps makes a visual impact, but it wouldn't actually directly affect the facility's use. You still can walk or bike and use the Union Street Bridge as it's intended.
What about impacts to this as a National Register listed resource?
So under the Section 106, the finding of effect, well, I guess we don't.
Yeah, that was my other question, is there a determination of effect on this?
So we have not received a determination from SHPO yet, but we are proposing that it is no adverse effect.
And why no adverse effect?
Because, again, you are not actually physically impacting the bridge. You are not changing its historicity in any way. The historicness.
I think you're searching for historic integrity.
Thank you.
And that's curious too, because like I said, I've seen cell tower projects where they have to do a DOE because there's a cell tower in a historic neighborhood and they have visual and audio impacts to that. So I'm curious though, but it sounds like it's kind of at SHPO still being evaluated. But that's something that would need to be, if there was a DOE impact determined, we would have to deal with that before this could be completed. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Or have some kind of mitigation or?
Yeah, we have submitted the determination of eligibility, and we would have to receive our finding of effect.
When do we expect to receive that from SHPO?
I can't answer that.
Okay. Thank you.
I did want to add that throughout this process, we've been working closely with the ODOT historical staff as well as the consultant historical staff, and then also our own City of Salem historian has been involved in the discussions and the preliminary determinations.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, but it's been a curiosity of mine for months. Apparently, there was a discussion about the outbuilding on the east side of Pioneer Village, whether that had historical significance, and I think ODOT was looking into that and going to answer that. I'm curious if that storage shed has significant historical significance.
I guess I should stay down here. So, again, it is in the process, and so the DOE has been submitted, and we have not received the finding.
Maybe you could poke at them?
Absolutely.
Well, I guess this, just a thought or a question, I guess, given what I just heard and some of the processes left, if we were to say tonight, build 4D, could this be completed? Could this EIS and all of its attendant decisions be pulled together all at once and be done by September 30th? I'm getting a little nervous that this timeline if we're waiting on SHPO for an outbuilding, SHPO for covering or going over the top, maybe someday, under a different plan, I think, in some ways, and the de minimis impact on the park, and each of those decisions that other agencies are involved in. Can we get there from here?
Okay.
Or is all that required for the EIS?
Yes, we do have to have those determinations for the EIS, but as we had discussed previously, just the LUBA appeal itself, dealing with the LUBA staff report, as with the timelines that have been provided by your city attorney office, we're in a pretty tight situation to try to make it to the end of September.
Okay.
The discussions we've had with Federal Highways is if we got a positive action on the land use LUBA appeal items and the de minimis with respect to Marine Drive, we could probably sweet talk them into an exception or a small extension so that we could actually finish the document. Again, is dependent upon having taken that positive action. A promise to take action, as we had previously talked about, is really not good enough. It would have to be adopted and put into ordinance by the city. So again, we're right up against the timeline as it is right now, and you're right to be concerned about it. I do think the determinations from SHPO would come in plenty of time.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, but we do have any number of other things that would need to happen in order to finish the document. So again, we need to see that positive movement pretty quickly, or again, we really won't have a choice if we want to avoid paying back the money.
Mr. Ditzler, any thoughts on that? I mean, what are you expecting from us to if 4D were to go ahead? What are you expecting from us to confirm this commitment?
I'll say that the lack of action on the LUBA remand, as well as the 4F de minimis, are indications that there is no longer support for the project.
Okay.
There needs to be support for the project. The project needs a champion.
Okay.
And in the absence of that, there's no need to continue to expend funds on something that is not supported.
Okay. So really, if we were to vote on the LUBA remand on the 20th, and that were positive or negative, would that be enough to keep this thing going and give us the kind of time that ODOT and the consultants need to complete the EIS?
That really is a question for ODOT. FHWA, we have provided a 3-year extension to a 10-year process, which is really at a limit. And so that 13-year process ends on September 30th.
Okay. Okay, so I think I understand.
And again, as we had previously discussed, Mr. Mayor, the promise of action, the intent to, the direction to staff to go ahead and prepare the findings to address the LUBA appeal would, that's, as we have discussed with Federal Highways before, that in and of itself is not enough, because we could still get to May or June or whenever you could put all that together, bring it back to the council, and still have the council vote no. So it's going to be that positive vote that really indicates that positive movement forward. And without that positive vote, we have no hope of getting enough time in order to really clean it up and finish it as a build decision.
Okay.
So that's what we would really need to see in order to even go to Federal Highways and beg a little bit of leeway to finish it up, because the city had in fact taken that positive action.
Okay.
Not just the promise of it.
Well, we are.
Is that fair, Phil?
Yes, Mayor, if I can add one more item. And I'll say that FHWA, without question, believes there's merit in this project. A lot has been expended to date on it, moving it to this point. And so it's, moving it forward or not, that's a difficult decision. We don't take what y'all are charged with here lightly at all, but again, in the absence of a decision, again, this has gone on long enough. The reason for the laws that are in place is to try to enforce a certain level of efficiency in what we do. And so it's, again, we're at the point to where a decision needs to be made.
Okay.
Clear decision.
Okay. Councilor Kaiser.
Thanks. Just to clarify, because I know this has been a question among the community about will the city have to pay back $9 million or whatever it is to ODOT or FHWA? And I think what Mr. Mayor was saying, and I think what you're saying too, and I just wanted to rephrase it so that it might be a little bit clearer, but if we make a decision whether to build or to not build something, we still complete the record of decision. Now, it might be borderline if we choose to build, if we can get that done by September 30th. But either way, either decision will result in a record of determination, and we will have completed the process. Is that understanding that correctly?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and then we won't be responsible for repaying, or nobody will be, because that was part of the process.
Yeah,
That is
and just to be clear, I think it's mostly ODOT and money from the MPO that's on the table, very little from the city.
FHWA's relationship is with the Oregon Department of Transportation. We would request monies back from ODOT.
Right, but if we complete the process, then you won't request money back from ODOT.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
One of the other issues discussed often in the community is that we can move along to another site quickly and build a bridge. If it's just a better site, it's more politically acceptable or environmentally acceptable. Is that correct, or do we have to do an EIS if we want to bridge that river at any point other than at
If
New
you
Point?
want federal participation in that bridge, yes.
Okay. Okay. Same thing?
Yes, if it's a different location, it's a different impact, it's a different document.
Okay. And it just takes whatever time, apparently 13 years to get one
Well,
done.
No.
We would hope not.
You don't want to join us in that? Okay. Councilor Nagy.
And just in that same vein, a 15-year delay in constructing an equivalent facility results in a 50% increase in costs, and taking that out to 20 years takes it up to 80%. So you add a couple more fives to that, and it's on an escalating
Your
trend
prices
as well.
don't go down? Okay.
And they actually accelerate.
All righty, well, we're a little after 8. Does anyone have any other questions you want to ask that relate to this topic? That burning, gnawing question that if you had it answered appropriately, you'd do the right thing and vote for this, or anything like that? Yeah, Tom, I'm waiting. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, though, that if you haven't had a chance to ask a question. Sally, do you want to?
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for having this work session. I especially wanted to thank Councilor Kaiser for raising this issue, because I think there's a lot of emotions that come with this project, and it's really nice to have the chance to air the concerns and to hear from, I'm assuming this whole panel is neutral panels as professionals that can support us in getting the best information timely, and I appreciate the work that Mr. Chandler and Ms. Warnicki have done bringing this issue forward, so thank you.
Yeah, very good job. And I think in the face of a situation where you're looking at a lot of folks who said they're against it, asking to find out about it afterwards. So I appreciate you taking the time with us to do this process. I really do.
And Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to offer that, we have met with all of you either individually or small groups. We're happy to do that again between now and the February 11th meeting. If you have any questions or suggestions for changing, for example, where we can make it more clear in that question and answer report, happy to accommodate that as well. So you've got my number and my card.
And then, Mr. Garrett, you and Mr. Cole and Mr. Chickering, thank you very, very much for being here with us this evening, as well as Mr. Disler, Mr. Morrow, and Mr. Jaffe. We really appreciate you taking time with us on this. I think it was helpful for all of us to at least understand what some of the outcomes look like and what some of the issues may or may not be in as this progresses. So And all I would ask is if any of the counselors would like to talk to any of you, would that be okay for them to get in touch with you? That might be helpful. I think if any of them have questions specific to your jurisdiction or to issues like this, it might be real helpful. I really appreciate it. So if we could get cards for them, we'd really appreciate it so they can get in touch with you. Any other, Robert, did you have anything you wanted to do?
No, that's just, again, my offer again. Happy to talk to you, answer more questions, give us the feedback. Appreciate it very, very much. And thank you.
Great. Well, with that, then, we're adjourned.